At Lunch began at the height of the COVID pandemic in January 2021. We've had a wonderful assortment of guests since then, drawn from the world of art, theater, social activism, journalism, medicine, and TV. But today, Adam Nagourney is our first return guest, not because we ran out of people to talk to, but because of the political moment we find ourselves in. He has been a trustworthy political reporter and analyst for almost 40 years, including 8 years as the national political correspondent for the New York Times. He's covered presidential campaigns for 36 years, beginning with George H.W. Bush's landslide win over Michael Dukakis. Since November 5th, we've all heard a lot of analysis and prognostications about what the 2024 elections tell us about our country and its future. Today, we're fortunate to have Adam with us to help us figure out what just happened and what does it mean for American politics moving forward. All of you are welcome to chime in in the chat if you have questions or, well, comments, but definitely questions. So welcome, Adam. Glad to have you here.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for having me.
So looking at my Facebook feed in the days after the election, I would say a lot of people in my circuit were shocked by Trump's win. Were you? Did you see it coming? Could you tell us about how you felt about this election over the course of the past year?
Yeah, I wasn't shocked. I mean, I think if you look at the pre-election day polling, it was really close. It was all margin of error, and I wrote some of those stories that I kept writing again and again. Every cliche, Julie, on a knife's edge, blah blah, And I think it's easy to forget that when we say something's in the margin of error, it is within the margin of error. It could go 2 points either way. So I don't think people should be surprised. I think the only thing that threw me off, like if you put a gun to my head on the Sunday before Election Day, I would have said, I think, Kamala Harris, only because I thought that Trump's final days on the trail were so bad. And I think, historically, one way you judge the way a campaign is going is by their closing arguments. And I thought Harris's were really powerful and strong. She was getting good crowds. She knew what she wanted to say. I thought she was connecting. And Trump was just being Trump, right? Like the crowds weren't turning out. But, that's anecdotal. And anecdotal is not the way you sort of figure out what's going on. I mean, it helps, but it's not the key data. And the data showed right till the end that it was really close. Our final poll showed Trump. This is all within margin of error stuff, so we can argue about how significant it was, but he had pulled up in Pennsylvania. And the last thing I would say is all along, prognosticators were saying that, there's a good chance that 4 or 5 of the swing states will go the same way. In this case, obviously, 7 swing states went the wrong way. Went for Trump, went one way. So, we can talk about this. There were some inherent reasons why this happened. And I think that Democrats who are critical of Harris might be being a little too critical. Things definitely did not go her way, but the obstacles were also huge.
So I have so many questions, Des, but actually,
Yeah.
Holly has asked a question in the chat, which says, so do you think the polls are useless?
Holly, I don't think they're useless. I think you or one, especially political reporters, have to be careful to use them to predict how the election is going to turn out. I say that as someone who wrote many stories that use polls to predict how an election was going to turn out. I think that reflects what media organizations are looking for now. But in fact, those are arguably the least valuable part of a poll. And if you were looking at the polls all through Election Day, I think that was really the most revealing is right direction, wrong direction. As a rule, voters who think the country is going in the wrong direction, and we found they were in overwhelming numbers, tend to throw the people in power out of office. And Kamala Harris was a person in power. The other indicator to look at is favorable, unfavorable of the person in office. It's a weird election for reasons that are obvious people on this call. Biden, was always like below 40% favorable. And that's terrible. That's what you lose with. So I guess all that kind of stuff made that a really big mountain for her to climb. So in answer to your question is you need to be discriminating about which polls you're reading and believing, in my opinion. I think the New York Times Siena College poll is reliable. Other polls are not. But just don't put too much faith in the polls. I mean, use them to get information. Don't use them to predict the outcome. It's a consumer of news.
Well, it's interesting as you said that, because as you said, the polls always said that the results were within the margin of error, which
Yeah,
means that they're outside the margin of your hopes, right? And so
yeah.
whatever your hopes are on either side. But I think, and we'll talk about whether what the reasons for that are, but you've been covering national politics for a very long time. And I would say we've been a polarized nation for quite a long time. And yet this year, or maybe these past few years have felt very different in terms of the polarization, but maybe we just didn't hear about it as much, or we didn't have a Donald Trump to bring it to the forefront as much. But do you think we are more polarized now than we've ever been? Because historically, if you look at elections, there's been a lot of sort of big splits.
Yeah, we've seen divisions over the years. Obviously, I can go back to 1968 during the Democratic Convention. Then people were really divided. I think there's a new intensity to it, a new intensity to the polarization versus the divisions. And I think it's caused by Trump because he is such a polarizing figure and he draws such polarizing reactions on both sides. And I also think that he uses polarization as a tool to mobilize his base in a way that we don't see that often in politics. I mean, I think George W. Bush, the second one, did that to some extent. I think George H.W. Bush did that to some extent. I'm not sure Reagan was doing that. We could talk about that. Obviously, Gerald Ford wasn't doing that. So, I mean, I think obviously. So I just think that Trump is a, I mean, I know, Julie, we're taught never to use words like unique and unprecedented. Trump is a unique figure in American politics. And I think that he has learned what polarization is. He enjoys it and he plays it to his advantage.
So you're saying it's not that the polarization wasn't there, it was that there wasn't somebody who could set it off at such a high intensity.
With the exception of 1968, which I remember being really a polarizing time, I don't think it's ever been quite this intense as it is now. I don't think that we were in a period when, you might be I hate to use a cliche, at your Thanksgiving table with your family and are a little reluctant to bring up the subject of Harris versus Trump because, your uncle or your aunt from wherever might be a Trump or a Harris voter. I mean, I guess the Vietnam War, I keep coming back to that, was sort of like that. But Reagan wasn't like that. Neither Bush was like that. Clinton wasn't like that. Obviously, Obama wasn't like that. So I just think that we're in a whole new era of polarization. So I think your question is basically onto something. It's on the money.
So, so we've been watching Donald Trump choose his cabinet over the past couple of weeks, and it's been described in a variety of ways, and certainly in the mainstream press, as he calls a lot of the places that I read, as and even in the more conservative press, a lot of the people he's been choosing for the cabinet level jobs seem kind of wacky or highly unconventional, if you want to put it in the most bland terms. And so I guess the question is, how terrified should we be as a nation watching these people even being suggested as cabinet members, much, whether or not they get confirmed?
I read a column this morning by Frank Bruni at the Times where he talked about the cabinet selectees or nominees as being like the green room at Fox, which I thought was pretty well done. Listen, these are extraordinarily unusual picks. And I think Trump is saying basically, I am going to do what I want to do. I do not believe, this is just based on observation, that these guys, or I guess there are a few women too, but mostly it seems white guys, have been vetted. So some of these things we're learning now about various nominees are probably as much a surprise to Trump as to a lot of people. I think Trump doesn't care what the Senate thinks. I think Trump is testing the Senate here to see how far they will bow to him and to his wishes. And this is an early display of power by Trump. And I think a key question is what the Senate does with this. I mean, clearly some of these people, some of these nominees, I mean, like normally I'd be with you like Julie, well, maybe some of them are all right, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you can't say that about Matt Gaetz, right? He really should not be Attorney General of the United States. I'm not sure you could say that about RFK Jr. either. I mean, there might be people on your podcast who, on the Zoom who might think he's all right, but he feels a little bit out there. So I just think again and again, Trump is trying to go as far as he can go and to show what he can get away with. The one thing I would say is, and I would have said this back in 2016 when Trump beat Hillary Clinton, I don't think anyone, any consumer of news can or should be surprised by what's going on. Trump signaled it, Trump telegraphed it, newspapers, whatever you want to call them these days, I think wrote at length about what a Trump presidency was going to be. And I think this is all like, you can be upset about it, but I don't think you can say you can be surprised about it. It's interesting also, that sorry, I just lost my thought through that question. This just came on the about gaps, but
Oh, well, we just got a news flash. Interesting. Who knows if it's true? Just heard Gates withdrew as nominee.
yeah, it's true. My phone says it's true, so it must be
Oh,
true.
wow. So,
Wow.
well, we'll
Okay.
see if
So I
that's
take back what I said.
so
No, I'm
that's
kidding.
an interesting thing. We'll see. But so listen, I think that what would be really interesting to me, and I think for a lot of people tuning in today, is, you know, look, the press gets a lot of criticism now, including from me, even when I know it's not right to do it, about
Yeah.
this, that, and the other. You know, why are they saying this? Why are they saying that? Why are they normalizing Trump, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Could you walk us through what it's like to be a political reporter now versus when you began covering elections in
Oh,
the late 1980s? And
yeah.
what how has it changed? And I'm talking about in terms of what you read, what you write, how reporters report, how you write stories.
Yeah, that's a great question. Listen, when I was doing this, when I was a candidate reporter, which I guess I was with Michael Dukakis, Bill Clinton. That was a fantastic job. There, there was no internet really. So you were coming in every day, observing what the candidate did, soaking it all in, thinking about it, talking about it, and then at the end of the day, writing a story, right? And hopefully the story would be considered. And what I tried to do, sort of like a step back, hopefully sophisticated look at what was going on. Well, you can't do that now. The reporters are expected to file all the time. I mean, when there's been a couple times when Trump said something particularly incendiary at a rally, I would get emails from friends saying like, "How come the New York Times hasn't reported on this?" I'm like, "It's been 10 minutes, right?" And it gives you less time to consider stuff. If the president is calling if the future president is calling Kamala Harris retarded or talking about a sports figure's genitals, like we don't really have the background to know what to do with that. So it takes time to get it right. So that's a big part of it. The sort of spin of stuff, the speed of stuff, less time for consideration. The other thing is that because of Twitter or X or just social media in general, the playing field has been really kind of flattened here. That means two things. One is, I will say without question, the New York Times is not as influential and authoritative as it once was. It just is as it is what it is. The other thing is like you can get real-time criticism of what you're writing as soon as it's posted, for better and for worse. And I think it can make reporters a little bit um, defensive. I remember getting knocked around I think it started in 2004 by a blogger who didn't like my coverage. Will not mention his name. And I look back at it, I look back at my whining about it and thinking like, comparing myself to Michael Gold, who's one of our Trump reporters, like considering what he goes through every day, he finally got off Twitter. So it's just relentless. And also I think that I don't mean to go too far down the waste your time with journalism stuff, but I think the changes in like what's appropriate for a newsroom or reporter to do, like there was a period at the times when reporters inside the paper would be criticized by some colleagues for the way they handled various sensitive issues. That was kind of unheard of. That's happening less now, but obviously, it makes you more sensitive about what you're writing. That's for better and for worse, right? I think you obviously saw reporters that could be arrogant or insensitive about really tough issues, whether they have to do with race or gender. And I think people are better about that now because of that. But it just means it's a much different kind of job. I think that if you would talk to me again 20 years ago, I would say, you have a chance to be a candidate reporter covering Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, definitely do it. Now I think about like, I don't know, are you sure you want to do that? I mean, just think about it. Different world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I'm just curious, just in terms of what do you read now? Like, how do you even, like, in addition to being
Yeah.
on the road covering a candidate, what do you feel you have to look at? Because it has to be an array of
Yeah.
commentary and reporting outside the norm. But on the other hand, you could spend your whole time reading instead of doing stories. So what do
Yeah, I
you
found myself reading less fiction and discretionary stuff, at least during a campaign.
Yeah, but I mean, what kind of things are you to inform your coverage?
Yeah.
What do you find useful?
So in the morning, I get newsletters from Axios and Politico, and I'm probably going to forget one and regret it, and learn a lot from those, which are kind of a compendium of what's going on, what people are saying, what's important. During the day, I get alerts from all those organizations, in addition to the New York Times and the Washington Post, Politico, Wall Street Journal, and I also keep an eye on Twitter X, whatever you want to call it. Like that might be changing now, Julie, because of for all the obvious reasons with Elon Musk taking it over. But whatever criticism I had of X, it was a really good early warning system about what was going on. Obviously, I'm not looking at my phone now, but I suspect that I would have seen Getz pulling out first there before the LA Times and the New York Times and the Washington Post had a chance to send out news alerts, because stuff goes up there faster because it's not fact checked the way it is at the major
Yeah,
newspapers. So those are the main ways I get news. I don't really watch. I mean, I don't really. Sorry, if there's any television people. I don't really watch TV that closely. When major events are going on. So this is mainly the way you do. And I listen to various podcasts. I listen to obviously the Daily, obviously, right, and instead Herman's the Run Up and the David Axelrod. I think David Axelrod, the David Axelrod ones, and um and read various Ezra Klein, like top of the pile there. So
so ask you something. I mean, I think there's you know, everybody was talking about the issues, like, oh, people aren't, paying attention to the issues, or Kamala didn't articulate the issues well enough, or, there's always this issue-based criticism of either coverage or the candidates or whatever. And I guess my question is, do you think the electorate in general has gotten more ignorant than it used to be? And or is it just a fantasy that like 30 years ago, people were sitting around looking at the policy platforms of the various candidates and making these super informed decisions? Do you think people are, I don't want to say more stupid, but less informed now?
I
Or
don't
do you
think
think they were
people are.
never informed?
Yeah, I don't think they're less informed, but I think they might be getting some information that's not correct, 'cause that's the way what's going on now. Um, I think issues have always been one thing, but people also vote based on their feelings and emotions, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, so for example, right, you and I might be able to objectively argue, me in Los Angeles, you in Soho, that the economy is much better than it was 4 years ago, right? But most voters do not feel that way. And they do not feel that way because they remember this thing of inflation. And outside of New York City, they know what it's like to pull into a gas station where its prices are 350, or here in California, 350, 450 a gallon. So I do think issues are important. And I think in a inchoate way, like people just sort of sense stuff being out of control, whether what's going on in the Middle East or what's going on, with Russia, and I think that also sort of plays into stuff. Um, but again, campaigns are emotions. And I think that like the response of some Trump voters, someone just asked whether I look at right wing sources. I absolutely do as well for news and opinion. I get all that stuff. And one of those things that I saw were people talking about the Trump election. Daddy's back daddy's back home. And that sounds vaguely sexist, maybe, but I think that captures a lot of the Trump appeal, the sort of authority, control. I'm going to bring America back to the way it was. So I think all that stuff's important. To your question, I think the one thing I think that's changed a bit is since there's so much more unfiltered, unchecked, dare I say, fake news out there, people get it and consume it, and that plays into things as well, right? Do you think Hunter Biden is part of is the Biden family a big crime conspiracy family? I kind of think not, but I think you'd find if you polled it that a large enough segment of voters think that is true. And that reflects a news environment where there's just a lot of stuff bouncing around.
Yeah, so when you talk about the big daddy question, I think that to me is going back to my original question, should we be terrified? Is, maybe it's, I think my parents were Holocaust survivors. And so when
Yeah.
I hear of somebody following somebody because they think they're the big daddy, that's always something that just strikes terror into my heart because that doesn't feel like a rational thought process. And especially because it's somebody like Trump, who seems like the worst daddy ever. So, I do wonder about that. Or is it just, and have you seen this kind of authoritarian impulse? And I won't say in the American people, because I do think one thing people keep forgetting is that, yeah, Trump won by a legitimate margin, but Kamala Harris got an awful lot of votes as
Yeah,
well.
she did.
It
Yeah.
was pretty
Yeah.
close to 50-50, even if it
Yeah.
was 48, whatever it will end up being. But how does that, and I guess this comes to bed, and it's the constant frustration you must have, is that when you're dealing with somebody who's, the whole fascist question, all of those things, like how do you help people think about that?
I mean, I guess I couldn't sit here and say don't worry about it because I think you should worry about it. I think we're really going down a road we've never gone down before. Um, I think that some of those people writing in advance, mainly in left-wing sources, that Trump had whatever fascist tendencies. I think those were very believable arguments, and I think some of the stuff that he's talking about doing, the recess appointments in the Senate, trying to sort of seize as much power, the purging of the quote unquote federal bureaucracy, that sort of points in that direction. So I think it's something that people need to be vigilant and very concerned about.
Well, so
I don't
then
know what I was saying, who knows whether there could very well be this could be the height of Trump's popularity right now. And a lot of stuff's feeding into it, and people might be reminded after he takes over what it was that led to his approval rating getting so low and that he lost he lost to Biden by in the popular vote a lot of votes, right? So he was not in good shape. It just seems closer because of the electoral college, but he lost a lot of popularity when he was president. So it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell where this is going to go. But I think that you're right to be worried, frankly.
Well, so then I guess, and we will get to questions people have about, did Kamala lose because people wouldn't vote for a Black woman, or, well, how could they overlook January 6th? We will talk about that in the middle, but just following up on the how terrified should we be question. I think everybody's talking this phrase that's been very much in vogue that Trump has torn the guardrails off of our democracy. And even if and it certainly seems like he's trying to blow up the system, which I find really kind of crazy since he's somebody who seems to have benefited extremely much
Yeah.
from our system. It's not like he's been suffering under the system that we have. So I guess the question is, do you have a sense from knowing the players in Washington now, especially in the Republican Party right now, how strong are the guardrails when you now have really, I think it's fair to say every branch of government is now dominated by Republicans. But do you have a sense of like, they always seem to roll over, but do you think that this might be different this time, or is that just naive?
I think the guardrails are much weaker than they were. I think that we've seen with the Republican Party that most of them tend to roll over for whatever reason, self-preservation, right? I mean, you can understand what they're thinking. I am interested to see what Mitch McConnell does now that he's presumably in his last term and not the leader. Will he push back on Trump? I'd love to know whether he regrets now they did not push for the impeachment back when he was the second impeachment, which would have stopped Trump from coming back as president. I do think, and this is an instant analysis, which is always the worst kind, but I'll do it anyway. I do think the Matt Gaetz thing suggests that maybe there are some guardrails, that there was enough pushback from the Senate, at least in that case, that he had to pull back. He might always have been a bridge too far. Let's see what happens with the other ones. But I do think that I would watch to see if there's any chance that McConnell joins Collins or whoever else in coming up with those three votes that opponents of Trump will need to stop him from doing some of those appointments. That's what I would watch for. But Julie, your question, have the guardrails been diminished? Absolutely. No question about it. Between the Senate and the judiciary, there's no question about it.
So let me ask you something, because I'm always very mystified by all the rules of the Senate and Congress, which I think the Republicans have been much, much, much more adept at manipulating and using, maybe because they don't apologize. I think it was Jon Stewart the other day was saying, like, if the Republicans see a loophole in something, they just grab it, whereas the Democrats tend to say, oh, well, that's not how it happens. And then they politely slink off into the sunset. Do you see any, well, I guess it's a twofold question. Do you see a stiffened spine in that direction on the part of the Democrats who are there now, in the House and in the Senate to play a little more hardball if they can as the minority party, as the Republicans have? And if they do, is that a good thing? Because, it's always that tricky thing, right? You want to beat your enemy, but then do you want to become them?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, again, Trump won, right? And in 2016, you and I might have been saying, well, he won, but he lost the, popular, whatever. But he did win, right? So it's a little bit harder to be blindly oppositional to him. And I think Democrats are trying to figure that out now. I think Schumer, who I've covered and known for a gazillion years, I think he's been pretty effective as the opposition before. I think he was effective as the Democratic majority leader in the Senate over these past couple of years. My guess is, assuming he'll stay in that position now, he'll be that way again. I think he's sort of a crafty guy, and being from Brooklyn and upstate New York, I think it makes him a real smart guy. So, we'll see. But I think that if you were in a room right now with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, they don't really quite know what their strategy is going to be going forward. They're kind of figuring it out. It's a tough environment. If I was them, I might sort of step, who am I to say? I might sort of step aside and let Trump, hurt himself, with stuff like Matt Gaetz for a while before stepping in. But we'll see.
Well, it's interesting. So going back to in the chat where people were talking about the anti-Harris Latino vote and why abortion wasn't the game changer. But, all those different issues probably came into play. But tell me if I'm wrong. It looks to me like the vote for Harris was much less, that Trump's vote didn't go up that much. But Harris just didn't go up to anywhere near the levels that Biden got in 2020.
That's correct. At least the latest figures I've seen, that's absolutely correct.
Right. So, which implies that a pretty good swath of the voting electorate, presumably people who might have voted for a Democrat, I would assume, or at least some of them, just chose not to vote, like as a protest vote or something like that. Did you, in your reporting, talk to people like that and ask them? I have a couple of friends like that who didn't vote from the left because of because of what's going on in Israel and Gaza. And I'm frankly struggling with that. As how do you talk to people who just sat it out rather than, it's like being pure. And I wonder how much of the vote, is there any reporting yet on that to understand?
I haven't seen reporting yet on that I trust, but that's going to come. I do think that elections have consequences. And when I hear people saying, I'm going to sit this out, or I'm going to vote for Bobby Kennedy Jr. because I'm upset with buying over Gaza, I'm like, okay. I mean, I think that voting for a third party candidate or not voting is sort of a cop out, right? Like the choice was Trump Harris, and you have to make that choice. And I just never had patience for people who were like, I'm not going to vote. I'm going to vote for Bobby Kennedy or whoever, Jill Stein or whoever. So um, there are a lot of reasons why this was going on. I think um, part of it was clearly gender. Again, it's harder to show with polling, but I do think Americans are not quite ready to vote for a woman as president. I just think that's reality, or at least a woman Democrat. I actually wonder whether a Republican woman might do better. I assume race comes into that as well, though obviously country elected Barack Obama. So, but I still think that's part of it. And part of it, like, I don't want to give Kamala Harris a complete pass here. It, I think she might have been or would have been. She was fine as a candidate. She made some mistakes. She had to pay a lot for what she said in the past. I think she could have or would have been a stronger candidate if she had been able to go through the traditional primary caucus nominating process. In other words, if Joe Biden had not waited until the very last minute to step down. I think if she had gone through that process, I've seen this again and again, she would have been a better candidate. She would have known how to answer difficult questions. Or if not, she would have been compared to other people in the field, and Democrats might have been able to pick a better challenger to her. My point here, though, was that, like, we could talk about external circumstances, but also, like, part of it that I think that some people just never warmed to her as a candidate for whatever reasons.
Yeah, yeah. See, here comes in a good question is how influential will the brilliant billionaire bros be? You got Peter Thiel, Musk, Bezos. Um, I guess my question is that question, but how influential are they always? Maybe now are they more openly influential, or is this also something different? Because I do think the Democrats have a lot of questions too in terms of their own courting of the billionaire class, as Bernie likes to say, that I think also has fed this feeling of being left out by a big section of the country.
Absolutely.
But do you think now that these billionaires who are, mysterious, they want more somehow, do you feel that the influence is even stronger?
I mean, let's just start and end with Elon Musk, right? Like, I mean, we can talk about Peter Thiel or Bezos is a little more complicated. But I don't think I can remember ever seeing a billionaire or whatever you want to call him, business person so influential, so close to a president, so influential on appointments and policy before. And he he sent a lot of money to the Trump campaign. He financed the whole get out the vote operation. There's no kind of oversight over that. So no, I think this is a very different world. I don't, again, like Peter Thiel, I think is more like traditional the way it's been in the past. But Elon Musk is a whole other class here, and I think that's a significant change from anything that we've seen in recent American history. It's huge.
Yeah, yeah. So, a question, going back to, this larger question, which I'm just kind of obsessed with, which is the polarization and where we are
Mhm.
as a country, et cetera, et cetera. But, I know there have been periods in the past when the Democratic Party has been so severely trounced that it has to look at itself again. And
Yeah,
likewise for the Republicans, even though I think the last time the Republicans did it, they came up with a very different plan for the future than the one that they ultimately followed with
absolutely
Donald
true.
Trump.
Yeah.
But do you remember? Well, I guess the question is, do you see a period in the past when the Democrats were facing this kind of, obviously not the same challenge because Trump is in his own class or lack of class, whatever you want to call it. But have they been this sort of thrown into some kind of disarray, partly because of their coalition? It's just harder to create, the Republicans coalesce about two or three, issues that are pretty negative and can just barrel forward, whereas the Democrats have a much broader constituency. Can you remember a time when they were thrown back like this?
Yeah, I want to be a little careful here because I was thinking this on election night too, like when a lot of my Democratic friends were kind of melting down, and that's not meant I'm not being pejorative or making fun. That really is, I mean that. Um, Elections are cyclical, right? Like, I'm sure I can't tell you how many times over the years I've written Democrats in disarray stories right after elections, and And they were right, right? Democrats might have been out of the White House and out of Congress, out of Senate, out of the House, and they were all divided because of the coalition politics that they have to deal with. And should they go to the center? Should they go to the left? Should they, I mean, we've seen this again and again, right? And historically, voters change, the party changes. Historically, the Democrats will get up, sort of think about what they are going to the future. We'll see Trump move from being an outside agitator to being the actual president who's responsible for inflation and gas prices and what's going on overseas and whatever, God forbid, the next pandemic is. And I mean, if you look historic, I hate to say this and be wrong because I don't want to make any predictions. There's a pretty good chance Democrats will take back one or both houses in 2 years in the midterm elections 2 years. And just as an even, I mean, like, I do think, and again, we're a little too into this to know for sure. People talk about the realignment of the political system here, parties. I think it's more a Trump realignment. I think people are much more dedicated to Trump, the personality, the strong man, if you don't mind, than the party and what it stands for. So I would not assume that if let's assume that Trump doesn't try to run again, or God forbid, if he can't survive his term for health reasons, that if Vance takes over, J.D. Vance, the vice president, I don't think there's any reason to think that he will necessarily, I even dropped the word necessarily. I don't think there's any reason to think that he'll be able to reassemble the kind of, dare I say, cultish coalition that Trump has around him. So I just think the thing to remember is that politics are very, they're cyclical. Things change. People's tastes change. People's desires change. The economy changes. The world changes. So yes, Democrats are in disarray. They've been there before. Republicans have been in disarray before, and they tend to figure out a way to come back and win again. So the Democratic Party also has what appears to be a pretty strong bench of younger, relatively, well, I guess next to Biden, even you and I are younger, right? Like, but younger candidates to run for president in 2028. So I think that people should just sort of cool their jets and let that happen.
Well, and so I guess the other question is, I think a lot of people have been looking somewhat, I don't know whether hopefully, but with interest at local government. And that is sort of an interesting question I wanted to ask you, with this desire on Trump's part to dismantle the federal government, or to dismantle the federal bureaucracy. Your hope or your feeling is, oh, does this mean the states are going to be more powerful? How do you see that dynamic right now in terms of where the states are in terms of their power to fight back? I mean, what does it mean and we both live in states that might feel particularly vulnerable right now, New York and California.
Yeah, California, Gavin Newsom, the governor here, has been very, very aggressive about presenting himself and the state as resistance to the Trump White House and putting in policies and trying to fight them on issues, in particular, the environment. My sense is that New York, which is my heart on home state, with Governor Hochul, has not done that yet. Whatever. The thing I think we need to watch is to what extent will Trump fight the states as well, right? He has already said he's going to go after Newsom. There's concern that he's going to try to undo the watered down congestion pricing plan that Hochul finally put up. Like, how much is he going to let states do what they want? If we were in a normal kind of political system and you were to say to me, well, this means the states become more powerful and the states can do what they want, which is a federalist system, I guess, which kind of, to me, that's a traditional Republican point of view. I don't think Trump has it. I think he will try to take on blue states like where you live and I live and stop them from doing what they want to do that runs counter to what he considers important. So, fair question. We'll see what happens, but gosh knows what will happen.
Right. And I don't want to ask you to be a prognosticator because I know Jon Stewart did this very funny bit, right? The night of the election, playing all the prognostications right after many elections in the past that were all completely wrong. Like we're going to be in a post-racial society after Obama was elected and all that. But somebody does ask about the tariffs and that you think we'll have buyer's remorse if he actually, or is it too complicated to even figure it out right now?
I mean, I guess that goes, I think it's a fair question. I think it goes a little bit too far, because let's see what Trump actually does and what he can get through Congress. I think there's a lot of institutional resistance to the aggressiveness of the tariffs that he is proposing. I am not an economic reporter, though I did major in economics at SUNY Purchase, for whatever that's worth, which isn't much. My sense is that you impose what is that, 30% tariff, 100, I forget what his latest figure is, that should result in inflation for people living in this country. And I think that'll be a problem. But, again, everything seems so uncertain at this point. And Trump is known to say he's going to do stuff and not do stuff. Like, for example, he said he's going to scale back or limit the SALT deductions, the state and local real estate tax deductions, which I know are important to probably at least some people on this call in New York and California. We'll see if he actually does it, right? So he talks a lot of stuff. Let's see what he can actually do when he actually does.
Well, I can't believe we're almost at the end of this. There's so much to talk about. We didn't even touch on the refugee situation, which is particularly horrifying to me. The AJHS is the repository of Emma Lazarus's papers. Her great colossus is on the base of the Statue of Liberty. My parents were refugees, so that'll be a topic for another day. But I
I'm
want
happy
to
to come back
end.
anytime. Yeah.
That'd be great. But next
Seriously.
week is Thanksgiving, and I'd like to end on a happy note. So, what are you feeling thankful for today?
Ah, wow. Surprise question. I am this sounds really corny. I'm thankful for friends and family. And sunshine. I guess I always try to look for positive stuff to be hopeful about. It's a little bit challenging now, but I guess the thing I would say is that long term this country has survived a lot, and I think we'll survive this too. And politics is cyclical, and I think the only thing to keep in mind is Trump can do a lot of stuff over the next 4 years before whoever the next president is, and this country has survived world wars and it survived the Civil War. It survived the scourge of racism. It survived 9/11. It survived the assassination of presidents. I think it will survive this. Do I think this will be an easy time? No. Do I think it's going to be easier if you live in New York or California? Yes, I do. So if that's any kind of positive thing. And I don't know what it's like there, but here it's a beautiful sunny day and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I'm sure
Well, here it's kind of overcast and raining, but I'll be
Okay.
Pollyanna today and say we've had a drought and we need the rain. So I'm going to look at the rainy day
Okay.
as a
You're
somewhat
future
positive.
looking. I'm all for droughts. I'll take the sun, let the kids deal with the lack.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Adam.
Thanks,
It was
Billy.
really good. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate this. I appreciate you
Okay,
doing
take
this.
care.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. And I hope everybody out there has a lovely holiday. Thank you.